Alto Subarco! Stop your boat. This is the United States Coast Guardsman doing something that defies all maritime logic. He is leaping from a speeding pursuit boat across open water to land directly on the slippery hull of a moving submarine. He has exactly 60 seconds to pry open the hatch before the men inside pull the internal valves, intentionally sinking the multi-million-dollar payload to the bottom of the ocean. But this action movie stunt isn't even the craziest part of the whole operation. It's how this crude, cartel-built submarine managed to bypass the most advanced maritime surveillance grid on the planet to get out here in the first place. Somewhere in the East Pacific, hundreds of miles from land, a vessel slips through the ocean waves. It's a narco-sub. Inside the 40-foot or 12-meter fiberglass tube sits 17,000 pounds, 7,700 kilograms of cocaine, worth nearly $250 million. Notoriously difficult to detect, these elusive vessels are used by cartels to haul narcotics long distances, with most making it to their destinations without ever being spotted. But this one has strayed into the wrong stretch of water, one that's guarded by the United States Coast Guard, and now it's being tracked. Capturing one of these subs might seem like a simple interception, but finding them in the first place is a mathematical nightmare. The United States military operates an unparalleled tracking network, using radar designed to hunt supersonic missiles and satellites that can read a license plate from space. Yet somehow, a jungle smuggling syndicate using cheap fiberglass and diesel engines managed to bypass it entirely. These vessels are hard to catch, with Coast Guard personnel giving them nicknames like Bigfoot or the White Whale, due to how rare it is to actually see one out in the wild. Even with the Coast Guard's powerful radars and surveillance equipment, there are steep challenges involved in hunting down these stealth subs. The Eastern Pacific Ocean spans millions of square miles, roughly the size of the entire continental United States. Trying to secure a grid that vast is like having a couple of police cars attempting to patrol the whole country. With so much water to cover, it's easy for smugglers to slip by undetected. And then there are the subs themselves, which are a piece of genius engineering all on their own. Despite the sub in their name, these vessels are technically semi-submersibles. The engineers build them so that 90% of their mass sits below the waterline, hidden beneath the rolling swells, with the only things protruding above the water being a tiny, heavily shielded cockpit and an air intake pipe. The tops of the subs are also usually painted blue or grey in order to blend in with the surrounding ocean waves. Finding one is like finding a needle in a haystack. Their low-profile designs and fiberglass construction give them minimal radar signatures, causing military computers to mistake them for rogue waves. On top of this, narco-subs move slowly through the water, with many barely reaching peak speeds of 10 knots or 11.5 miles per hour or 18.5 kilometers an hour. While this means it takes several days to reach their destinations, it also means they move quietly. You can patrol the open water for an entire career without ever seeing a single shadow slip past your hull, and historically the Coast Guard only catches around 11% of these vessels. But during this specific run in June of 2019, the military caught a break. The crew, crammed into the tight quarters of this specific narco-sub, assumed this would be another uneventful trip across the ocean. They expected to arrive at their destination unspotted and unscathed. Little did they know, a high-altitude surveillance aircraft had caught a fleeting glimpse of their wake. The military wasn't looking for the shape of a boat. They were using sensitive infrared cameras to track the microscopic heat of the sub's diesel exhaust bleeding into the freezing ocean. Once the aircraft locked onto that thermal anomaly, it relayed the information to teams aboard the US Coast Guard cutter Munro. The Munro stayed miles away over the horizon so their heavy ship's engines wouldn't be heard, while promptly dispatching a helicopter to keep an eye from the sky, along with 2 small pursuit boats to intercept the vessel. The guardsmen had to approach the sub as stealthily as they could, and there wasn't a single minute to lose either, since they were up against a ticking clock. Cartel protocol dictates that if a crew hears a military boat approaching, they immediately rip open the internal scuttling valves. This rapidly floods the submarine, sinking the multi-million-dollar cargo along with the evidence straight to the crushing depths of the ocean floor. On top of the risk they would sink their own sub, the smuggling crews on board are often armed. It's a dangerous situation, and the Coast Guard boarders have only a couple of minutes at most to apprehend the crew. As the boarding boats suddenly materialize out of nowhere and draw closer to the sub, one of the armed Coast Guard officers calls out in Spanish, "Alto Subarco, stop your boat." It doesn't, and now the Coast Guard has no option but to attempt a daring boarding maneuver. Armed with pistols and night vision goggles, which they know they'll need to see inside the sub's dimly lit hull, 3 guardsmen slip off the side of their own boat and leap directly onto the wet hull of the moving narco-submarine. One of the boarders rushes to the hatch, pounding on it with his fist, ordering the crew inside to come out. The sheer shock of the tactical ambush leaves the crew paralyzed. Knowing they have no options left, the trackers open the hatch and raise their hands in the air. They had no time to react and preferred to leave with their lives intact, rather than running the risk of going down with their ship. The operation was a textbook success. The 17,000 pounds, 7,700 kilograms of narcotics were seized. The 5 crew members were taken into custody, and the military had pulled $250 million straight out of the cartel's pockets. The authorities assumed they had finally choked out the Pacific supply lines. They believed they had won the day. But this decisive military victory didn't end the conflict. It simply trapped the cartels in a corner, forcing them to look at the lockdown Pacific Ocean and invent an engineering workaround so insane that the authorities never saw it coming. If the cartels couldn't push their submarines north through the lockdown American naval grid, they would have to turn east. They would have to cross the Atlantic Ocean. Narco-subs typically travel between South and North America, following clandestine routes out of countries like Colombia, Venezuela, and Ecuador, across the Pacific Ocean or Caribbean Sea towards Central America, Mexico, or the United States. To make the weeks-long transatlantic voyage, a subcrew would have to survive 3,500 miles, 5,600 kilometers, of unpredictable ocean, dodging heavy commercial freighters and battling deep-sea storms, all while trapped inside a cramped, homemade tube. It seemed like an impossible mission, but deep in the Brazilian Amazon jungle, hidden beneath the canopy in a makeshift shipyard, cartel engineers were building a vessel designed to do exactly that. They christened the new sub the Shay. At over 71 feet, or 21.5 meters long, this stealth-grey semi-submersible was an imposing piece of hardware, but it was not designed with human survival in mind. To cross an ocean, a submarine needs an immense amount of fuel, so the cartel engineers crammed 5,300 gallons, or 20,000 liters, of combustible diesel fuel into the unarmored fiberglass hull. Then they had to fit the payload, 6,600 pounds, or 3,000 kilograms of cocaine, worth well over $100 million. To push all of that weight across 3,500 miles, 5,600 kilometers of water, they installed a heavy-duty industrial diesel engine. By the time the fuel, the drugs, and the engine were installed, there was almost zero room left for the actual human beings who had to pilot it. The crew was forced into a tight, claustrophobic cabin near the rear of the vessel. It had just enough space for one person to sit at the steering controls while 2 others could lay flat on the floor. There was no bathroom, there were no beds, and there was only a single air vent directly overhead to stop them from suffocating. They were trapped in a sealed, dark coffin, sitting inches away from a roaring, uninsulated diesel engine that was burning oxygen and bleeding toxic exhaust fumes directly into their cabin. The cartel needed a crew desperate enough to endure this psychological torture, and they found one in Agustin Alvarez. Alvarez, a 31-year-old former Spanish amateur boxing champion, was offered a life-changing payout to climb aboard the Shay and pilot it across the Atlantic alongside 2 Ecuadorian cousins. If they could make it to the coast of Galicia in northwest Spain, they would be set for life. So on October 29, 2019, they sealed the hatch, leaving the Amazon basin and slipping out into the treacherous, open waters of the Atlantic. What followed was a 27-day test of human endurance. Stuck in their tiny, suffocating compartment, the 3 men worked in grueling 8-hour shifts. They had to stay laser-focused since a single miscalculation could send them hundreds of miles off course into the empty expanse of the ocean. For sustenance, they only had bottled water, cold rice, sardines, and energy bars. With no plumbing on board, they had to use plastic bags when they needed to go to the bathroom, leaving the bags piled up inside the hot cabin. Day after day, the men suffered through the constant, deafening roar of the engine, trapped in the dark with the sickening stench of raw diesel fuel, rotting food, and human waste. And then, the weather turned. During their nearly month-long traversal, the Shay was hammered by 3 separate, brutal ocean storms. They were locked inside a dark, fiberglass box, choking on fumes, while thousands of tons of crashing ocean water tossed their vessel around. They couldn't surface, and they couldn't call for help. Despite all of this, they managed to navigate the 3,500-mile or 5,600-kilometer gauntlet, arriving off the rocky shores of Spain. Their plan was to wait offshore, liaise with a few local cartel fishing boats, unload the cocaine, and then pull the scuttling valves to sink the Shay to the bottom of the sea. But the Atlantic Ocean had one final trap waiting for them. The waters off the coast of Spain were so turbulent that the small fishing boats couldn't safely pull up alongside the submarine to transfer the drugs. Running critically low on fuel and out of options, Alvarez made a desperate call to some old childhood friends on the mainland, begging them to come out and help bring the cocaine to shore. It was a fatal mistake. While Alvarez and his crew were suffering in the dark, a multinational intelligence net had been tracking anomalies in the region. Law enforcement agencies from the United States, the United Kingdom, Spain, and Portugal had been waiting for them to make a move. When the crew finally realized the police were closing in, they ripped open the scuttling valves to sink the Shay and threw themselves into the freezing water to swim for the rocky shore. The two Ecuadorians were arrested almost immediately, exhausted and broken by the journey. Alvarez managed to make it to land and hide in an abandoned house for 5 days before the authorities tracked him down. All 3 men were sentenced to 11 years in prison, and the authorities raised the sunken submarine from the ocean floor, recovering all of the cocaine. But the cartels were watching very closely, and this failed transatlantic mission taught them something. The engineering of the submarine didn't fail, the fiberglass held together, the engine survived the 3,500 miles, and the stealth design evaded detection for nearly a month. The only thing that failed the cartel was the physical and mental limits of the human beings piloting it. Humans get tired, humans make desperate phone calls, and exhausted humans make catastrophic operational mistakes. So the cartel engineers looked at the millions of dollars lost and asked themselves a very simple question: what if they removed the humans entirely? By deleting the human element, the cartels could solve every operational vulnerability they faced. A human crew requires food, water, and breathable air. They demand a claustrophobic cabin that eats up valuable square footage inside the hull. They require life-changing payouts to risk their lives, but worst of all, a human crew is an intelligence risk. If a smuggler gets caught and interrogated by international authorities, there is always a chance they will crack under pressure and give up the names of the cartel bosses to secure a plea deal. A machine doesn't need to breathe. A machine doesn't demand a paycheck. A machine can't be interrogated. Instead of paying desperate men to endure a toxic cross-ocean voyage, cartel syndicates hired tech experts and marine engineers to build an uncrewed semi-submersible. They removed the crew cabin entirely. Without the weight of a human crew and their survival supplies, the sub's profile could be engineered to sit even lower in the water. This erased an already microscopic radar signature and freed up valuable space for fuel and cargo. But operating a drone in the open ocean presents a complex engineering hurdle. A remote-controlled vehicle relies on a continuous stream of data. For years, traditional maritime satellite internet required heavy, power-hungry dome antennas that would instantly ruin a submarine's stealth profile. But the commercial release of low Earth orbit satellite networks changed the maths entirely. A flat, water-resistant receiver the size of a pizza box can now provide high-speed video feeds from anywhere on the planet. To replace the human pilot, they bolted a flat Starlink satellite antenna directly to the bow of the fiberglass hull. Then, they wired dual surveillance cameras into the sub. One faced out across the water to monitor the ocean trajectory, and the other was mounted deep inside the engine bay to keep a constant eye on the mechanical gauges. This meant a cartel operator could sit safely behind a computer monitor deep in South America, remote controlling thousands of pounds of illegal cargo through international waters. But a live video feed wasn't enough. If a heavy ocean swell crashed over the bow and temporarily submerged the antenna, the cartel operator would lose their connection, so the engineers integrated autonomous navigation software. If the Starlink signal dropped, the onboard computer would take over, using pre-programmed GPS waypoints to keep the vessel on a precise trajectory until it crested the next wave and re-established the uplink. And boarding an uncrewed vessel introduces an entirely new tactical problem for the militaries hunting them. Now, if a cartel operator sitting in the jungle sees a military patrol boat appear on their live camera feed, they don't have to panic. They can simply press a keystroke to trigger a digital scuttling protocol, flooding the hull before the Navy even touches the boat. It was a huge technological leap for the cartels. And in July of 2025, the military caught a glimpse of this new reality. Scanning the waters of the Caribbean Sea, the Colombian Navy spotted a low-profile grey vessel cutting through the ocean. Assuming it was a standard narco-sub, patrol boats and aircraft locked onto the coordinates. Boarding crews moved in on small boats, drawing their weapons and executing the same tactical maneuvers used by the US Coast Guard years earlier. They approached the hull expecting to find a desperate human crew ready to pull the scuttling valves. But when the armed sailors finally threw open the hatch, they froze. There was nobody inside. There were no smugglers, no air vents, and no crude plastic bags. There was just a Starlink modem, a maze of wires, and an empty cargo hold engineered to transport 3,300 pounds, or 1,500 kilograms, of cocaine. Investigating the capture, military intelligence realized this wasn't a failed drug run, it was a beta test for an all-new smuggling strategy. The Gulf Clan, the largest drug trafficking group in Colombia, was running a dry trial of an autonomous drone. The smugglers were testing the drone's evasion capabilities in open water before risking a live payload. The Navy seized the vessel, marking the first time an autonomous narco drone had been captured in South American waters, but it certainly won't be the last. That initial 2019 Coast Guard strike didn't end the conflict. It forced a smuggling operation to evolve into a remote-controlled naval fleet. International authorities are no longer hunting desperate smugglers in fiberglass tubes, they are fighting an asymmetric maritime drone war against a highly funded syndicate. By taking the expensive human element out of the equation, the cartels fundamentally changed the economics of smuggling. If they start mass-producing these cheap, uncrewed vessels, they could overwhelm law enforcement with swarm tactics. They could launch 10 autonomous subs at once, knowing that even if the military intercepts 3 of them, the other 7 will slip through the grid. And it's a technological arms race that mirrors actual modern military combat. If a cartel can program an uncrewed vessel to deliver narcotics, a state military can program the exact same vessel to deliver high explosives. Ukraine has assembled a world-leading drone army, dispatching uncrewed kamikaze naval drones to blow up Russian assets, including warships and oil rigs, which you can see in action right here in the next video. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you on the next battlefield.